Converted man here. I've got an alien, first time ever, and did a thing about him. He has this video called Proof That Gods Exist, the God Thesis Part 1, and already complained about it live because I had nothing else to do. But now I've got him here live once again because we have nothing
better to do.
Yeah. So we're gonna go over who he is, what he is, what's going on, why is there, all that sort of good stuff. So why are you an alien? Let's start at that silly point and go from
why
there.
Why am I an alien?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So that's so Alien Milsrow, those same letters spell Orwellianism.
Oh.
So it's a yeah. So it's kind of a homage, if you will, to George Orwell and the idea of you'll notice that my logo is also the INSOC logo upside down.
Yeah. It's funny people say dystopia, but utopia was really I don't know if that's Oren now. For some reason, that's where my brain went. So I'm going to shut up because I'm thinking that's not him at all.
So he wrote about a bunch of utopia.
Okay. No, I was right. Okay. See, I was right. I knew I was right the whole time.
Yeah.
1984, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah. See, I was right, and I never doubted myself. edit from the video. It's live. I can't. But yeah, Utopia is actually the name of the place that can't exist, and then people have dystopian movies that are about what is an attempt at a utopian paradise. Like the movie I'm thinking of right now off the top of my head is The Giver. If have you seen that one? Yeah. And so these ideal, of course, then you could say idiocracy is either a prediction of what's to come or is a dystopian future. So that's I love those sort of ideas because we all want like an idealized world, but we don't have it. And that kind of many theists have different arguments for why that is if there's a God. But I don't know that your concept of God is the normal one that we typically encounter. So if you could talk about what you mean by the word God a bit.
Sure. So I think that obviously we live in America, and so I think that it's important to use words in the context that people are hearing them. And so when people hear, I think, in the United States, the idea of God, I think they're thinking of something that's omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient, right? So omnipresent meaning that it's everywhere, omnipotent meaning that it's all powerful, and omniscient meaning that it's very, very smart or infinitely smart. I think that I don't actually believe that there is anything that is actually any one of those other than omnipresent. But I do think that there's something that is materially indistinguishable. So there's no, like, in the way that you'll operate in your daily life, there's no distinction, there's no difference between that and what actually does exist.
Oh, I'm not really okay. So how is that different than like these attributes of omni everything that some say God has?
Sure.
And your version of God, does it have these attributes, or are those attributes unnecessary?
Yeah. So my definition of God would be a comparative term, right? So I think that when we're talking about anything, we have to do it in comparison to something else. And so when I'm saying something is a God, what I'm saying is that it is a God when compared to humans, right? So in comparison to humans, everything that we're ever going to interact with, it already knows. If we have a question, this thing will already have an answer to it. Everything that everywhere we might possibly go, that thing is there. It's omnipresent. Everything that we might be able to do, this thing can also do. So it's omnipotent.
Okay, let me just clarify, because in your video you used basically what I boiled down to an argument to and from analogy and I said it was a bad analogy. I stand by that.
Mhm.
And there was a lot of confusion of, do you mean the universe is God? Because you said anything, above or beyond humans or something to that effect. And it's like, well, does that mean a black hole is God? Does that mean the sun is God? What is this? What does this mean? How is God a entity, or is it some sort of concept?
Sure. So I would have to ask what your definition of God would be, because there are certainly like polytheistic versions of God that are obviously not omnipresent or omnipotent or omniscient, right? If you're talking about like Athena, that's a different thing than if you're talking about the sort of Christian God.
Yeah, I don't, because I don't believe in any God. I don't have any particular attributes that I think a God would have to have or not. I just want to identify, specifically for the viewers and myself, what you mean when you say God. It's like, it's not this, it's not that, it's not the sun. Like, that's more powerful than a human. The sun is more powerful than I am, but is that God? Well, people worship the sun, so it could be considered a god to somebody. But when you say God, I don't know exactly what you're referring to. You're referring to a entity, like you said, that this thing knows everything and it's everywhere. And it's like, okay, well, is this kind of like a deistic version of God? And if so, what other attributes might it have, or where's this concept coming from? Things like that. I want to try to pin down what it is you're talking about.
Sure. So I think that the way I would frame it is that God is a group of animals that exist beneath it, right? So it's all living things. If you're going to talk about it as a monotheistic God, it's all living things in the entire universe. That's God. Now, the reason I'll defend that is because when I think of what you are as a human being, I think of you as a clump of cells. And so similarly, I think that it's possible to have clumps of humans, which I would define as like a city or a country or a company, if it's a particularly large company. And those groupings would be a colony in the same way that an ant colony might exist. And so if you take the collection of all of those collections, that would be sort of Earth, which I also think is alive, meaning the living things in it. And then if you zoom that out even further, you could say the same about the galaxy or the universe.
Okay. So yeah, and here comes, the analogy. Of course, there's going to be problems inherent in it. But when you say alive, and the Earth, is Mars alive?
We do not have evidence to say that Mars is alive yet. No, we have evidence that there's water on Mars, and so there is likely to have been perhaps microorganisms at least at some period of time prior. But there's no reason to believe that there's life on Mars currently, and so there's no colony of life that exists on Mars currently, and therefore, no, it's not alive.
So the moon is not alive. Our
Correct.
moon. Okay. Yep. But when the astronauts landed there, was it then alive?
That's an interesting question. Was in that moment, was it alive? Yeah, I guess so. It would be a very limited form of life, because I think that it's important to think of this in the context of the framework of the colony, right? So like the interaction. So if we want to talk about specifically like the ants, so in that video, I talk about the collection, the collective intelligence of ants. There's a lot of collective intelligence between ants. Individual ants are really stupid, but they group together so cohesively that they're able to do some really impressive stuff. Now, if you compare that to a fruit fly, for example, fruit flies can live collectively. They can live at a giant dung heap with a bunch of other fruit flies. But there's no reason to believe that there's particular collective intelligence. So similarly, in your example of you have these 8 astronauts that are on Mars, or excuse me, on the moon rather, are they have collective intelligence, I guess, but ultimately they're part of human colonies. They're part of like America, or they're part of NASA, or they're part of, whichever group they might be part of, rather than really framing them as being fundamentally moon life.
Well, then we get into problems, like the space station. Is that alive? Because there's, a number of people up there at all times. It's always manned. People are certainly living there for extended periods of time. So
Sure.
at what point does having, and then there's other life potentially up there that we might be studying, other micro life, or I don't know if they brought some small animals up there. Who knows, So at what point does it then, with this definition, with this idea, at what point does the space station become alive?
Yeah, so I think these are interesting questions. But ultimately, I think that we can ask these same questions at the cellular level, and I don't think this is a difference between the animal colony and the cell colony, if you will, right? So, if you get a bunch of cells together and just throw them into a petri dish, is that an animal? Well, no. Is it even an organism? Well, probably not. In the case of, we can go down the list, and I probably can eventually decipher an answer that I'm comfortable with on each one of these questions. In the case of the space station, I would say that's an organism of larger NASA, which I'd say is a colony, or at the very least that NASA is a component of America, which is a colony. But is it really? I'm not even sure if I'm comfortable with that framework, because obviously it's an international space station. It's not like it's just reporting to America ultimately.
But you've extended this idea of hierarchy outwards into the universe. Now, certainly, this is the only planet we know of that has life. Now, we don't. There's probably life other places in the universe, but we don't know that for sure. So we can't say one way or the other definitively. We can say, well, yes, probably. But if there isn't, or even if there is, how does that make the non-living bits of space? How does that contribute to the universe being alive, since none of these things our species has not yet interacted with whatever is out there? They haven't interacted with us, and so on and so forth. So how does that contribute to the universe being alive if the criteria is Earth is alive because there's living creatures on it that make complex systems and so on?
Sure. So to the point of, if there's no other life in the universe, first off, I do reject that. I think it's pretty likely, just statistically, that there's other life in the universe. But if that were the case, then the highest colony that would matter, the god, if you will, would be Earth, hypothetically. What was the second point? I apologize.
Yeah. Okay. So, assuming there was life, at least in every solar system, or to go the other way with it, because we haven't interacted with each other.
Oh, that's
how
right.
is it that this is contributing to the universe being this mega cooperation that you're speaking of? Certainly, I can see that working in a city, but we haven't. Maybe if they've cooperated with each other, great. But then that's just more hypotheticals you'd have to throw out there.
Sure. So, okay. Let's say that there's a microorganism that's living inside of my body, that's not acting cancerously. It's not harming me in any way, but it's also not benefiting me in any way. It's just sort of there. It's sitting there in my gut, and it's doing absolutely nothing positive or negative. It's completely benign. And it's not interacting. Nothing's interacting with it. I would argue that it's still part of my body, right? It's still a component of my body, regardless of whether it's interacting with the rest of it. Now, to be clear, it's a less important component of my body, certainly, than other cells that are doing things directly. But if it's within the confines of the universe, I think Earth is similarly a component of the universe, regardless.
Okay, well, certainly the Earth is in the universe of the universe and all that, but your analogy basically breaks down, because the actors that make the complex structures, like in cities or in ant colonies, are not interacting with each other. So the universe then ceases at some point to be alive enough to be anything more than just what it is.
Could you elaborate on the cities for a second?
Well, you had made the analogy of the city is a complex structure that we formed
Mhm.
with our group, and then that analogy then translates to globally at some point, and that's why you would describe the Earth as being alive. Then the analogy goes from there and says, and then their universe, this is alive too. And I'm like, well, how does one thing because there's no interaction between the living components, unlike the cells. Maybe Earth is benign to the universe, but then you'd still have to show that the universe is alive. And how would you do that?
Sure. So I think that in order to prove that the universe is alive, it would require that you find evidence of substantial life outside of Earth. In terms of, I'm tacitly reading that as, do you agree to the idea of the city being alive and that the idea of humanity being alive?
Well, I have my objections to that terminology, but
Why?
because life is defined as a certain thing in science, and I'll just I'd have to look that up or whatever, but that's whatever that is, that's what life is. And any other definition is going to be one that is generated in order to forward any given idea or argument. In this case, you're using this word to try to explain to us this idea that you have, and I'm granting you that word because I don't want to mess with that. I'm fine with that. So what I believe about it is, or the word, or how we should use the word, or how we do use the word, is somewhat irrelevant in this context, because I'm trying to figure out what you mean by it, how this idea logically pan out if we steel man it as best we can. And the reason I said it's a bad analogy is because it does, it's like, well, you have this life on Earth that hasn't interacted with any other life that might be out there. And let's say there is life everywhere. Let's just say that for the sake of saying it. And then, well, in order to continue the metaphor, we would then have to say, and that life interacts with each other to form an even greater sort of city-like structure that would then form an even greater nation, and so on and so forth, until at some point you would then consider the universe alive because of the way it's functioning, equivalent to how Earth is functioning, given this particular analogy. But without those things, well, then that's more things you have to add to leap of faith, as you said in your video, that you didn't include. So
yeah. So okay. I'm a terrible person, obviously. So let's say,
are you?
Say it again.
I said, are you?
Obviously, of course I am.
Oh, okay.
Have you seen my Twitter? No. No, but so let's say grab a single ant out of an ant colony. We agree that an ant colony is alive, right?
No. Well, I mean, your definition, yes.
No, you don't think that it's. What definition would you be more comfortable with for alive?
Again, let's see. One popular definition. Let's see. This is Wikipedia, so whatever. It's good enough. Organisms are open systems that maintain homeostasis, composed of cells, have a life cycle, undergo metabolism, can grow, adapt to their environment, respond to stimuli, reproduce, and evolve. So an entire colony is not that. An entire colony is composed of individuals that are alive themselves. The entire colony is an emergent property of those creatures. I would say the same of hierarchies that we create. The hierarchy is an emergent property of us working together in a cooperative or even a non-cooperative way potentially. If we had this idea that it's a nice it's a nice way to look at it. I don't understand why we could look at it that way and why someone would look at it. I used to, when I was a believer in Christianity, I would think about how atoms are like the solar system, where you have these things flying around. Well, turns out that's the version of atoms in the books is not what atoms look like, and that's not how that works. So
Sure.
it doesn't line up at all with how the solar system moves. So
Yeah.
so that idea that the universe has molecules and therefore the universe is like the body of God or something just doesn't hold up with that analogy. Plus,
Okay. So
even
I
if
just want
it
to stick with this
yeah, so
definition of
I'm
life.
yeah, the what I'm trying to see is that if using your definition where the colony is a life form and all this, okay, great, I get it. All right, fine. You want to call that alive, we'll call it alive. And then take that all the way up to the universe. How would you demonstrate that it is the case? Now, maybe you're saying, well, you would need another leap of faith. Okay, great. But then that means your original composite argument and
Well,
slash
okay, before we move on, I just want to work with this definition of life. Are you alive?
as far as I know.
Why do you say that?
Why do I say that I'm alive? Well, I
Yeah.
fit the definition. I suppose that would be one way to go about that. Another way to go about that is it seems
Do
that
you?
huh?
Why do
Well,
you say that you fit the definition?
it was just the one that popped up when I searched for it on Google. It seems good enough to me.
The reason I asked this is because you, as a hold up, I apologize. Someone is printing. I have to move to a different room. The reason I ask whether or not you are alive is because you're an emergent property. You're an emergent property.
Yeah, to some
Animals
extent,
are an emergent property of cells, right?
I suppose you could look at it that way.
Okay. So when we say that a human being is reproducing, what we really mean is two different quote unquote humans, or rather two giant clumps of cells, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get together and they make a baby clump of cells.
Mm-hmm.
And that baby clump of cells manages to reproduce. But what we really mean is when we say the clump of cells reproduces is a bunch of individual cells reproducing, right? A pregnancy is a bunch of individual cells reproducing, as is childhood, as is life in general, right?
Yeah.
So why are you not an emergent property in the same manner that an ant colony is?
Well, I said you could put it that way. I suppose I don't know that changes anything.
Well, the reason I say that is it strikes me that but you could frame, if you wanted to, all life at the level of the cell, and that seems legitimate to me. But if you're going to allow this idea of human sort of grouping, right, animal grouping, it seems weird to me not to allow the colony grouping.
Yeah, well, again, if I understand where you're coming from. I just would view it in different terms, because I try to get precision of language. Natural languages is something that logic can't resolve because everyone has different ways of understanding words. And so then we have to appeal to some definition in some dictionary, and then we have to agree on that dictionary. And there's no real hard and fast way to say, no, this is the way that this word will be used. The end, unless the only way to get that would be to have an artificial language, which we're not using and may or may not have yet been invented. There are artificial languages. It's just, it's hard to speak.
Sure. No, this is fine.
But at any rate, so given your definition, because again, this isn't really about how I would frame it. It's about how you're framing it. And I'm fine with your way of framing it. I'm just saying, okay, now we using your ideas, using your analogy, I'm granting that the earth is alive in your definition, and I'm asking for the analogy then to show us how that then translates to the universe being alive, because unlike Earth, where we have a definite thing that you can say, well, all these entities are working together in this complex system. Okay, great. But the entities in the universe, we're going to have to now make a leap of faith, as you put it in your video. You said, I believe you said 2 leaps of faith were required. Well, actually, now it
Well,
seems that
no, there's two. There's the two. There's the one
well,
of calling it God, and there's the one of it being the omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient thing, or materially
right, but
indistinguishable. And the other one is
well,
that colonies exist.
yeah, but then the colonies existing would also then have to add another leap to say that those colonies are interacting with each other. Because if they don't interact with each other, then how do they translate to the colony? They're individual colonies, but they're not a group colony. So you then have to assume or believe that that these individual colonies are making an even greater colony to make the universe alive.
Sure. Okay. So do you want to talk about okay. Do you think you're smart? Do you think you have an intelligence system?
This isn't about me or my ideas.
No, obviously. I apologize. That came off as if I was attacking you personally.
No,
Do you think
no.
that human beings are capable of intelligence?
Yes, but again, this isn't really about my ideas or my thoughts.
Right, but the reason I asked that is why. Where's our intelligence come from?
As far as I know, it's the brain, and
Okay.
yeah, that's an emergent property.
Sure, but
Yeah.
what specifically? If you narrow it down, right, all of our intelligence is coming from cells, right?
I suppose. I mean, I'm no neuroscientist, so I couldn't really
Sure.
answer that question. It might be something that it gets like it's the heap of sand where it becomes this unsolvable question of, when do you have a heap of sand? And if you keep removing one sand at a time, do you still have a heap? And well, because the definition of heap is not a coherent lockdown definition,
Right.
it never runs out. In the same way, it could be that at some point, if you remove enough cells, I stop existing, at least in my current format. And you've killed me, at least in my current format.
Sure.
There might still be a living entity that we would call human, but it's not the me that people knew. It's now a different me because I don't have as many memories as I once did or capabilities as I once did. And then at some point, if we keep removing that, I will be dead. And then I certainly won't be the same human that we recognized before. So all of that is still not getting to where I want to go with this question of how are we getting the analogy to perform the function that you want it to perform without introducing yet another leap of faith, or whatever you want to call it, supposition or premise, or whatever you want to call it. I think you should call it a leap of faith, because that's what I would think it would be. Okay, I'm fine with Earth being completely alive, tentatively speaking. Now demonstrate that and we're going to grant that there's life other places in the universe, but unless these things are working cooperatively together, then they are not forming a more complex colony-like structure. And then your analogy would have to fail.
Sure.
Right? And so in order for you to have that analogy, don't you have to then say, well, we're also assuming this on top of the other assumptions we've already made?
Right. So again, when I frame this, I believe I said this in the video. If I didn't, I apologize. If we are the only animals that exist or are at our level of intelligence in the universe, then the universe doesn't exist in a living manner, and the highest level of life that exists would be Earth. However, if the universe in general does exist, and there are other forms of life that are equivalently or more intelligent than we are, which I think is very likely, then the way I would frame it is, let's say, because I'm a jerk, I take an individual ant out of the ant colony, right? I pick it up and I just move it and I put it into a petri dish 1.5 miles away from the rest of the colony. Does the colony cease to exist because that individual ant isn't able to interact with it? I don't think so. Does that individual ant cease to be part of the colony? I also don't think so. I think that it's just no longer able to interact with the rest of the colony.
Right, but you still have a number of ants that are working together to make that colony exist. At some point, if you remove enough ants, you destroy the colony. If you remove the queen ant, you probably destroy the colony. I don't know.
No, actually, that's
Well,
not true. That's not
depends
true.
what
This is an important distinction because a lot of people.
version of ants we're talking about, because different ants work
No,
different
it doesn't actually. This is an important distinction. Ant colonies don't require their queen to have their intelligence. Their intelligence is done because they interact generally with chemical reactions. And
but I'm saying that the colony, at least the original colony, as it was, if we destroy the queen, and I'm talking about maybe black ants, because I know those better than, say, the giant ant, which the giant ant, I forget its scientific name, but this giant ant that basically doesn't have a colony. It works on its own, essentially. It doesn't need. It's so big it doesn't need any other ant. Although I haven't been able to find the documentary I saw on it, and I was like, "Where is this?" Anyway, because it was really cool because they build these trenches. And there's just so they have a colony, but they don't really need one. But at any rate, if you destroyed the queen, they'd have to make a new queen, and at that point, distinctly, you would say, well, even if they're living in the same place, because they have a new queen, you could call it a new colony, or you could say, no, this is the same colony. It's kind of the ship of whatever the heck the guy's name is. It's again what makes it a colony? At what point? How many ants?
I'm extremely uncomfortable with the idea of it ceases to be a colony because it loses its queen. Its queen is a reproductive system. It's a system by which the rest of the colony is able to stay alive.
Yeah,
but it's not something that's keeping the intelligence.
Right,
it would be the equivalent of me losing my heart, right? Not in a woo-woo kind of way, but like my physical heart, right? If I lose my physical heart, I'll die very quickly because obviously I can't beat it. Therefore, the rest of my cells will die, right? That's a serious problem. However, I don't think that when we're framing what I am fundamentally, I think we have to talk about my intelligence system. I don't think it's fair to be saying that because I lose my heart, I'm no longer me.
No, you are, well, what are you? Are you your brain? Would that be?
Yeah, so I think you're in your intelligence system. I think what you are is your intelligence system and all of the other stuff that's required to keep your intelligence system alive.
Right. So at some point, if we remove pieces of your brain, we're breaking you that we understand as you today down, and at some point you will die. In the same way, whatever the brain is, because again the analogy kind of falls apart here for the ants, will cease to be if we break enough of it apart. But none of that addresses, without this other additional belief or leap of faith, or however you want to. Again, I'm not sure how you want to frame it. Of saying, okay, Earth is alive, other creature. Okay, so now we're adding. Fine, we've gotten to that point, tentatively speaking.
I'm sorry. We've gotten to which point? We've gotten to the point that
if we tentatively speaking, if we agreed on your suppositions, it got to the point where we both agree that the Earth is a living thing because of the things on it. And I said, okay, great. Now I also have to believe, on top of that belief, I also have to believe that life exists at our level or above in the universe. Okay. On top of that, then I then also have to believe that life is interacting with other life out there in the universe in order to form a higher thing? Or is it just enough that there's another species of life out there?
It would have to interact.
Okay. So now I also, so then just since you didn't have,
right?
So,
we interact with it.
Yeah, we interact, but I mean, these species would have to interact with each other in order for this greater colony to be a thing, right? A galactic colony.
Sure.
So now we have another belief on top of the belief on top of the belief, where it's that not only are there aliens, but there's other aliens, and these two aliens work with each other. And this,
Do you believe that there are not aliens?
It's irrelevant. I don't know if there is or isn't. I can't believe one way or the other.
I mean, like, obviously that's something that neither of us have evidence for or against.
So
against it.
So I have no belief one way or the other until there's evidence.
Really? Just
Yeah,
mathematically, you're not relatively convinced that there's likely to be life elsewhere.
I don't do things by probability. I'm
We've
too much
checked
of a
two planets, and both planets that
yeah
we've checked, there's been water.
yeah
And both of those planets, there's been evidence at least of microorganisms having
yeah
been there at one point.
yeah. I mean I know again not really relevant to the point I'm trying to make. Now in your original video you didn't go into this next tier of saying and this life is cooperative with other life out there. So your analogy, even though I still think it needs a lot of work to get there, is missing at least this component of another leap that we would have to make to get to where you want us to be.
Yeah, I
Would
had to
that
confess,
be
I didn't
fair?
even think of that as being a leap of faith.
Okay.
I thought of
Or
that as being
whatever you want to
something
call
that,
it. I mean, I don't know. Again,
yeah,
I
I didn't even think of that as something that people would disagree with. Candidly.
So and that's good because
I
again,
am equally convinced that there is other life in the universe
yeah,
as I am
sure.
that stars exist.
That's fine, but then you also have to think that other life is working with other life,
Correct. Yep.
in order to form this mega galactic. And then the question would be, well, how many groups have to work together to get to the place where you would then call this a god?
Comparatively, it would have to be omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient in comparison to humans. Yeah.
Right. So you would need many groups working together, right?
Not really, actually.
Well, in order to know everything, you need a lot of.
It's not that you know everything. It's just that you know everything anything that we as humans might be competent enough to ask, it would know the answer to. Which is not the same as it actually knows everything. It's just everything that we would think to ask.
Oh, okay. But this
Right,
is
because
this is leaps of technology or information gathering at this point. But that wouldn't be omniscient, at least not as it's defined. It would be
comparatively indistinguishable.
Would it though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a question that you think a dog is capable of asking you that you don't know the answer to?
I don't know. I don't speak dog. It's quite. I don't.
That's kind of the point, right? Dogs are really stupid.
So with this collective agency working together, why are we calling it God? Why wouldn't we just call it the collective agency that's working together?
Absolutely, that's a good question. I think that God is a productive term because it has the sense in it, both that it includes everything, which I think has moral implications, which I'm going to get into in my next video in part 2. But also I think that there's a sense in which that is what it is, right? Like when we're talking about God as being this omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient thing in the West, then it falls directly into that definition. So I don't know why we wouldn't call it something that it falls in the definition of.
But it already okay. We're still in the omniscience, the knowing everything, or at least knowing enough to where it's indistinguishable from knowing everything. And at some technological level, I suppose one race of alien doesn't even need to cooperate with another race. Could potentially be that role. But that still doesn't make it that it literally knows everything. It just means it knows a lot. And why would I call that God? Just because it knows a lot of things.
What's the distinction?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
No, I'm asking you. What's the distinction between that and God in your mind?
Well, I don't have any hangups with calling anything God. I can call this lobster God. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just asking why bother calling it God? Why not just call it closer to what it actually is rather than because
we have a definition and it fits the definition.
But it doesn't.
Find in the West,
we don't know that it actually knows everything. We just know that it knows a lot of things.
That it knows everything that we know how to ask.
Right. Well, then we could ask, does it know everything?
I think all terms are comparative. Would you agree with that? I say
if I ask this thing, do you know everything? It either is going to say yes or no.
Yeah.
If it says no, then it's not God.
No. I don't think it's a fair way to look at words. If I say that you are tall, when I'm talking about a human being, that means a very different thing than when I say a tree is tall or a building is tall, right?
Mm-hmm. You're
It's
just
still the
abusing.
same word tall, but it's a
Right.
comparative term. I'm
Right.
comparing that building to another building.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comparing you to another person,
Right.
right?
But it's an awfully interesting way to get around answering the critical question that this hypothetical entity would need to answer to determine whether or not it's worthy of being called a god. Is if I cannot ask it if it knows everything, or asking it that question, it'll be like, yeah, well, I know all the things that you can ask me. I'm like, great. What's the answer to my question? Do you know everything? Yes or no? And if it will not answer that
No,
question
it would
or
it would
cannot,
answer that, and it would say no, but I know
okay,
everything
then
that
it's
you.
not God.
Why do you say that?
Well, just because I can.
It's indistinguishable
But
from your
why?
perspective from
Why would
being
I
God.
call it God? Why? What's it matter what I call it? Why
I
does
mean,
it?
ultimately, the moral implications are the same regardless of whether you call it God. It just seems silly to me when we have a definition not
But
to
it doesn't fit
follow
the
the definition.
definition. It doesn't fit the definition. And even if it did,
Do
why
we want to
does
look
it?
up the definition of God? We could do that.
Well, that's one particular definition given by depending on who you take it from.
Yeah, I think it's the
But
hardest
then,
one to get to, right? It's a
yeah,
lot harder to get to that than to,
right. So
the definition of
if
use,
you're saying
right?
that to be called God, you must be omniscient. You must know everything. Well, this thing might not qualify. We'd have to ask it. We can't
It's a
ask it.
comparative God.
I
Compared to
then
you, it's God.
well, it's still to me. I don't know why we would use the word when any other word would suffice. But if it wants to be called God, or you want to call it God, fine. It's God. Whatever. I don't
Well, I
really
just don't
see
understand what
the
else you would call it.
whatever it actually is. Whatever it is. If it's aliens, call it that. If it's an advanced species, call it that. If it's a group collective, call it that. Whatever it actually is, let's just call it that. Because we get into the problem of if it wants to be called God, because I don't care, I'd be like, okay, whatever, you're God. I don't know, whatever. What's it matter to you if I call you God or not? I would ask it the same question. But that so we've potentially met a thing that is not omniscient, but is close to it. So we're just
Comparatively
gonna
omniscient.
comparatively omniscient. So it's kind of fitting our definition. Now let's move on to omnipotent. It can do
Wait, I don't understand why you're saying kind of.
well because it doesn't know everything. So it
But it
doesn't
does
really fit.
comparatively, in the same way that
But
when
it
I say
doesn't
you're
but it
tall,
doesn't
it's a
matter if
comparison to
it's
other humans.
comparatively, it matters if it is.
Are you tall?
To fit the
Wait.
trifecta
Are you
of
tall?
omniscient.
Wait, no. Can you answer this? Are you tall?
Again, we're not this is not
No, this is
relevant.
important. Are you tall?
This it's subjective.
Exactly.
Right.
God is subjective. Are you
Okay.
tall?
So
Because
if
if I
God
ask an
is
ant if you're
subjective,
tall,
then anything can be called God,
no,
and
no,
then
no,
the
no, no. That's
discussion
not
ends.
fair. That's not
Sure
fair.
it is.
Not everything.
Absolutely.
That's not fair because not any
Doesn't
human can
matter
be
if it's
called
fair.
tall. That's not fair. Not
You
any
seem to
human can
be
be called tall.
you want to call it God. I don't care what we call
Not any
it. Doesn't
human
matter.
can be called tall. It's subjective, but
Uh-huh.
among humans, certain humans can be called tall and other humans can't be called
Right.
tall. So,
Right.
as a human, are you tall?
Average size.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
If I compare you to the Empire State Building, are you tall? Of course
No.
not. You're short. If I compare you to an ant,
Right.
are you tall?
But
You're huge in
this is
comparison to an ant.
a rather big, large red herring from
No.
the
It's
point.
not. God is in
Absolutely.
this. God has to be used as a term in the same manner that we'd call tall. From the
Okay,
perspective of the
so
ant,
again,
you're tall.
since it's subjective, then everything is God and anything is God, and then the word becomes
No.
meaningless.
Not
You
from your
can't have it
perspective.
both ways. You can't have it both ways.
No, because not anything
Yes.
is tall.
Well, but here's the thing: we're going after these three things that a god must have to be called a god. It must have these three things. Now, I don't know why it's those three things, but that's what we picked. Whatever, I don't care. Now we're trying to identify if it does contain these attributes or not, and we're now settling for well, it's close enough. Okay,
It's
It's close
comparatively
enough.
has those things.
It's close enough. It doesn't really have the actual thing, but it's close enough. It's not
Right, I'm
10,
not really
but
tall.
it's 9.
In
So it's good
comparison to
enough.
Mount Everest, I'm
Okay.
not
All
actually
right. So
tall.
it's not really 10, but it's 9. So it's close enough. All right, great.
No, it's not that. In comparison,
Right. In
it's as a
comparison,
comparative, but that has to be the way you
right.
talk about it. I'm not
Okay,
tall when
so
you compare me to
comparative
Mount
in
Everest.
comparison, it is a god-like entity because it knows answers to anything I could ask.
Right. It's God in the
Okay,
same
so
way that
computer
I'm
is
tall.
God. So computer's God.
No.
Because it can answer any question I can put to it. Well, not computer. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The internet is God.
Mhm.
The
No.
internet can answer any question I ask it.
No, it can't.
Sure, it can. It can answer any question. I put in a question, and the internet will give me an answer. It
What
might
did I
not
have for
be.
breakfast today? The internet can't answer that.
What did I have for
No.
breakfast
It's not the correct answer. It's
today?
not just a matter of being
Ah,
able to answer it.
See,
What does
there's
it say?
another qualification. What did you eat for breakfast today?
Yeah.
Top results from
What did Alien Milsrow
thekitchen.com.
eat for breakfast? If it gets it
Depending on the
right,
morning.
I'll Venmo
Yeah.
you $1. I promise.
Yeah. So if this entity knew what I ate for breakfast somehow, and it also knew, what am I thinking right now, and it would be able to know exactly what I'm thinking in that moment.
Yep.
That would be interesting. And if that's what you're wanting to call God, again, it's not that it knows everything, but it's close enough. And I'm saying there's a distinction between actually knowing everything and being close enough to knowing everything. And
But there's a
so,
distinction between being tall and being comparatively tall.
yeah. And so,
I don't know what that means. Like,
well,
everything is comparatively
it
tall.
means that comparatively that it's not the actual God, if there is an actual God, because it's just close enough.
What's the tallest thing?
It's a term that is in purport. It's like, well, it's a god to us, but
tall to
then there's
us.
something that's a god to it, and so
Sure.
on and so forth. Okay, great. Now let's see if it's everywhere. Omnipresent. Is it everywhere? Well, no, it's not on the planets that don't have life. It's not in outer space.
Oh,
because
no,
that
that's not
doesn't
fair.
have
That's not
life.
fair. That's not
It's
fair.
not in black holes. Those don't have life. It's not on stars. Those don't have life. So it's not a lot of places.
That's not fair.
It
If
doesn't
it's
matter
anywhere,
if it's fair.
when
It
I
doesn't
say that it's
matter if it's true.
omnipotent is,
No,
again,
we're saying
omnipotent.
omnipresent.
Excuse me, omnipresent rather.
Yeah.
You're right. My fault. Omnipresent is about being everywhere that you might go. It's also a comparative term. And so if it's everywhere that life is, which definitionally it is, right? Then by definition, it is omnipresent.
Right. So then when we went to the moon, rather, when
Yep.
people went there, then that became God.
It already was God.
It already was God without the people there, so we don't need people.
Yeah. So again, the way I would define God, and the way that I define you as well, is it's not just the intelligence system. It's also all of the stuff that's required to keep the intelligence system alive. The moon is required to some degree to keep us alive as the life on Earth, because it's valuable to a bunch of oceans, a bunch of ocean life, and it's also valuable to some degree, I think, in terms of like protecting us from comets. I'm not really sure about the second part.
So some meteor that is completely irrelevant to our life.
Mhm.
If we visited that meteor, does that make that meteor now a god?
So the way I would frame that is, I eat a Subway sandwich. The Subway sandwich obviously wasn't part of me, and later I'm going to poop out much of the Subway sandwich. So I'm going to leave the comment. But in the moment that I eat the Subway sandwich, the moment that I eat it, even before I break that nutrients down, I was talking to Jackson Weed about this earlier last week, and he wouldn't define the Subway sandwich as being part of his body until it's been broken down and been used by his cells. But I define it as being part of his body from the get-go, once he swallowed it.
Okay, so once life is there, then it's part of God, and then when life leaves, it's not part of God. So God is wherever there's life.
Yep.
So it's only everywhere in terms of wherever life is. So it's not everywhere, it's just wherever life is.
It's a comparative term. Yeah.
So it's not everywhere. Okay. So
but
does it again, it's not quite there, but it's good enough for you. Okay,
I don't
so
understand what you're
let's
saying.
just
It's
make the
good enough for
distinction.
me. It's good enough
It's
for literally everyone.
no,
Because
it's not.
literally
It's
everyone
good
is
enough for
going.
you. This is your definition. This is your idea.
No,
It's not
it's good
mine.
enough
It's not
for
somebody else.
everyone.
No, not necessarily. We haven't polled everyone. We
No,
haven't
that's not
asked
what I'm
everyone.
saying. That's not what I'm saying. If every single person can't leave God because they are a component of it, then by definition, no life will ever be in a situation where God is not omnipresent.
Okay, I see. Okay, if that's what it is, then it's still not. It's not omnipresent in the way that omnipresent has been formulated.
It's comparatively omnipresent.
It's a different version of it. Therefore, it's still different. Okay, moving on.
I don't know what that. No. I don't know.
I know you don't know, but it doesn't matter. I'm making the distinction for the viewers, not for you.
It's just a weird distinction because
it's I know,
it's
but
like saying that tall. Like there's
yeah.
a fundamental real existence. Like
If we
it gets to a
decided
mile
that,
and a half tall,
yeah,
it's a tall thing now.
we could do that. We could make it a definite definition rather.
So do you want to make an arbitrary cutoff of where tall is?
We could, yes.
But do you think that's a productive use of the word tall?
It might be actually, but
Really?
that's towards the artificial language, which wouldn't have the problems that natural language does. So it actually might be very productive to have an artificial language. But again, red herring. Okay, let's go.
No, I don't think this is red herring because like there's a definite like, you can define.
We're moving on. We're moving.
You can define levels of intelligence in the same way that you can define like meters of tallness.
Right. We're moving on. We're moving on to all powerful.
Okay. Sure.
All right. Omnipotent. All power. I don't know why it's not called omnipower, but omnipotent.
Yeah.
It can now this classically defined as can do anything. Some theists have said it's anything logically possible. I don't care. What's your version?
Logically possible. Yeah.
Okay. It can do anything logically possible. Mm-hmm. So this group of species working together, or even one group of species, can do anything logically possible.
Sure.
How do we know that they can do all of these things? How do we exhaust that?
Yeah. So again, this is perhaps this would count as another leap of faith that I assume that aliens exist and are substantially more far ahead of us. Humans have only been doing stuff really for like 200,000 years, which is nothing. It's a blink of an eye. If you presume that we continue on the same trajectory that we've been on so far, it's pretty clear that you're going to completely eclipse human levels of technology very quickly, right? The Star Trek kind of stuff that we were thinking is going to be thousands of years in the future happened within 60 years of it appearing on television, right?
Yeah, right. Yes, if we continue and we survive as a species long enough, hypothetically, we will be at insane levels of technology that would appear to be magic to our current selves. But we're not there yet. But yes, one day we might be if we can only manage to survive this stupid virus and also spread out into space and stuff.
Sure.
But, we're pretty much probably going to screw ourselves before any of that
happens. We don't die, then eventually
if we don't die off as a species, then maybe we'll get there, but I won't be around to see it, so it doesn't really matter to me. Unless they also make a way for me to live long enough to see it within my lifetime. But at any rate,
we'll freeze you. And
then but at any rate, so it's powerful to the point where, from our perspective, it's indistinguishable from, not from magic, but it's really, it's doing something that we don't know how to do.
Sure.
Okay. So we can't exactly know that it can do anything. We just know it can do more than we can do.
We know that it can do anything that we can think of.
Okay. Well, I would just ask it to show me if it can do anything that I can't think of as well. And then if it can do that, then it might be impressive. But
that's why
it's kind of, I view omnipotence as this very difficult thing anyways. I'm not sure that even if it existed, we could actually identify it. and I'm now breaking my own rules of it doesn't matter what I think, but I don't care. I'm a lobster, damn it. but at any rate, okay, so it's powerful enough to us, or advanced enough to where it seems like it can do just about anything, and we go, okay, that's good enough. All right. So if it has these three things, which all require leaps of faith to get to, that it
I don't
has
think they do. Which
every single one of these things are things that we have to have faith that it has, because we have no demonstration that it has any of these in the first place, because we don't have a demonstration.
Okay, sure. So do we want to talk about it? Yeah, that's fair. Do we want to talk about what the universe would be if humans are the only or the most intelligent living being in the universe?
Well, I mean,
Because I think that's interesting.
If
It's
that's
different.
important to you, I suppose. I mean,
Sure.
if you would say that at that point there wouldn't be a God, I have a different way to go.
No, I'm not saying there wouldn't be a God. I'm saying that there wouldn't be an omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient God. Which is
Okay.
different.
All right. So we need these advanced alien species, or at least one of them at any rate, to fulfill this role. Okay.
I'm saying that all of this stuff that is described in the New Testament or the Old Testament or the Quran or whatever it is, all of those things are technically possible. I'm not saying they happened, but I'm saying that they're technically possible. Right? That is the idea of the omniscient and omnipotent God that we're describing. Right? If we're saying that humans are the only kind of life, this is the highest level of life that exists, I don't think that humanity at the time that those things were claimed to have happened was capable, even collectively, of making those things happen.
So this is okay. So I want to make sure that I have this right, because it's your position. I want to make, again, I think we've gotten your argument better, because we've, I hopefully, and these are things for you to think on, but you noted, well, you need this other supposition of these aliens must work together, or that the aliens must be advanced enough, one way or the other, but you're going to have to,
right. If we want to explain why I think that, I think that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you can, that could be a separate video. I'm trying to get to the point where I'm headed, which is that if it takes life in order for any of this to work, then at some point in the universe, God isn't. There wouldn't be a God. In the T1 point of the universe, there's no God. At the T2 point, there's no God.
But we're at the T200 point.
Or the T200 or 1,000. It's going to, okay, so now...
If you're saying that God evolves, I agree with you, right?
Well, I wouldn't. I was just. It's indistinguishable from the universe at that point. If you're saying that the component bits are eventually.
Well, God is an arbitrary cutoff. God is a comparative term to us in this case, because we're talking us humans. And so when we say that the universe is God, what I'm saying is that the universe is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. Obviously, omnipresent. In comparison to us, right? So so that part, I guess it's hypothetically, technically a leap of faith. Again, I really think it's very close to an axiom to say that there's other life in the universe. But I guess hypothetically, if you want to call that a leap of faith, you could. But again, it's definitely true, right?
I mean, it's if you say so.
Well, we can go into that. I mean, I'm happy to.
But okay, so. So without life, without any living things, the universe itself is it God, or is it evolving to become God, or what terminology are we using?
If we're defining God as being omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient, and the only life that exists in the universe is humanity, or rather Earth in general, then in that case, according to the Christian definition of God, Earth has not evolved to a point where it's God in comparison to us.
But I'm saying I'm saying going back in time for the universe itself,
Sure.
before any life could have. Well, who knows if life could have been at any given point? Who knows? But at some point, like I said, the T1 point, there's probably nothing alive, at least not in any definition that either of us has provided. So there's not a God yet, and eventually, at some point, a God is possible, but it has to evolve from these.
Yep.
It has to. Okay, so this being is essentially a natural being. It is part of the universe. Universe. It requires the universe to exist. It didn't make. It did not make the universe.
Yeah, I'm not claiming that. No.
Okay, it could make a new one, perhaps, but it didn't make this one.
I mean, certainly it can make a VR universe if that's what you mean.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Well, maybe it could. Well, if it's technologically advanced enough, maybe it could make a new universe for all we know.
Right. Something that's indistinguishable from a new universe. Yeah.
And my simple, dumb skeptic atheist that I am is saying, well, okay, great. I still don't know why we're calling it God, but whatever.
Because it's comparative.
But
do you agree that words are comparative? Just a base level.
Natural language has many comparative words, but
and we're talking in a natural language, right?
Right, and because that's the case, then I couldn't call something that was like God a God because it's not God. I want to call.
We've defined God. We've defined God as being omniscient,
arbitrarily with those things, and I don't know that.
Do we want to go to Wikipedia? We can do that.
Well, it doesn't matter what Wikipedia says. This is a different problem. We could get into.
Wait, but
it doesn't matter.
You're saying that we made up the definition for God, and you're right. We made the definition up for every single word, right?
Yeah.
We made up the word the word Paul.
Right, but you can't.
Neither of us are disputing.
Yeah, you can't define something into existence, and this is the problem with.
You can't define tall into existence.
Right, because it's a concept that exists only in the mind and not in reality.
Right. So are you.
Yeah. No, I'm a thing that exists in reality.
I'm
not just a concept, but I have labels that are concepts. They exist, but only in the brain. They don't exist in some. You can't hold the number one. I've been emailing and trying to find a way to describe this because it is difficult. It's not that it doesn't exist; it exists only as an object of the mind. And so, if that's what God is, an object of the mind, yeah, sure, people believe in God and it exists in their minds. Does it exist actually
Do you exist actually?
As far as I can tell, yes.
Why do you say that?
Why do I say that? Because I'm not the sort of skeptic that would doubt reality. I suppose.
No, why do you say that humans exist? Why do you say that animals exist?
Because it appears that that's the case. We have empirical evidence. Yeah, we have empirical evidence, repeatable tests. We have a valid and sound argument. It's whatever the animal is defined as. Again, I don't know, but here's the thing.
Animals are just collections of cells, and cells are just collections of atoms.
Sure.
So I don't understand why, like the definition of life itself is extraordinarily arbitrary. Similarly, the definition of animal is arbitrary.
Let me turn it around this way. Why does it matter to you that we call this God?
Because it seems that we have a definition for God, and it seems silly to pretend that we don't have something that fits it.
Well, it doesn't quite fit it, as I've already outlined. Well, no, comparatively is not the same as fitting.
Right. When I say someone is tall, I'm saying comparative to the average human.
Comparatively, your version is different than somebody else's version. There's a different question.
And we're talking in a natural language. Of course,
there's a different way to put that, which is that I can label anything as God as well, and I can say
no, you can't, because
you
can't say comparatively. When I say that no.
Absolutely.
When I say that a person is tall, that is an
Mhm.
objective statement. It is
But
true or false because
yeah.
there is an average human being and there is a person who is
Right,
taller
but
than that average.
you're assuming that I'm using the same definition, the same attributes that you used for God, and I'm saying that those attributes were arbitrarily picked by us humans. It could be
Right,
any
and
attribute. It doesn't matter if
agreed
we
to by
agree.
1.2 billion Muslims
Agreement,
and 1 billion
agreement,
Christians or something like that, right?
agreement doesn't make something true.
In the context of words, it does. When we're talking about the English language, it's a decentralized system,
Yes,
and
but it
so
doesn't make it.
we agree
It
as a
doesn't
collective.
make it. It doesn't make it true. It
There's no
doesn't make
I
it.
don't know what you mean by true. Like, if we as people who speak English define a word to
The
mean
amount of people that agree that we're going to start calling oranges apples and apples oranges. Great.
now all of a sudden that's the word.
That's the word. Right.
Correct.
But
Words can change.
and that's based on something that we can empirically observe. So whatever it is the label's referring to, we say, okay, this thing is what makes this thing an
Right.
apple.
And we have a
This
label for
yeah,
God,
and
there's a thing that fits it.
and well, but there isn't though.
No, there is a comparative thing that
Well,
comparatively fits it.
comparative is
So
not
you're
this.
human.
If
Talk
you
about
had a thing that's kind of an apple, you don't really
it's not
have an
kind of an
apple.
apple. It is an apple.
No, it's not. It's kind of an apple. That's what
A
I'm saying. Is
person who
there's
is
a
7 foot tall is
right.
tall
So this
as
is
a
the
human.
difference, though. There's a subjective and an objective, right? You
No,
agree with that?
that's not fair at all to say.
Yes. Well, it
No,
doesn't matter if it's
there's not.
fair. I'm
It's
saying that there
totally
is an objective and a
that's
subjective.
not fair. There's not
And
objective tallness.
well, but I'm not. I don't care about tallness. I don't care
I
about.
care about godness
Right. Why?
because godness is the thing that we're defining.
It's the
We're
thing that
we're
you're
trying to
defining.
question whether or not there's a God. It
It's
has
the
to be
thing.
comparative.
It's the thing that you're defining.
I'm
And
defining it in the same manner that all of Islam defines it.
it doesn't
All of
matter.
Christianity defines it. All of Judaism defines it. All of Mormonism defines it.
And
define it the same way.
so the question then becomes,
Paganism, I mean,
if a number of people decided that was does the amount of people that agree upon the definition, that's what makes it that definition. Okay.
when we talk about a decentralized language,
How many people agree to say, well, but now the definition is this? Well, no, you don't have enough people yet.
I don't understand why this is a specific to God question. That's true to all language.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to get to is there is a split in difference, and here it is. For human, the word human, that's an objective term that is defined by science. There are certain attributes that make a thing human. It's objective. It's not subjective. It's not tall. You have to fulfill these requirements to be called a human. That's
There are
something.
arbitrary cutoffs.
That's fine. There's still cutoffs.
Right, but they're arbitrary.
Sure.
Right. So
But there is something. But there is something to point to and say that is a human.
Right. Arbitrary
Now,
cutoffs you can point to, and you can say
right.
this thing is sentient.
Yeah,
this thing is
there's
human.
there's an empirical evidence for it. There's a repeatable test for it. There's
right.
a valid
And even in questions like, I mean, like, it's
not close to human. It's not kind of human. It is human.
No, I don't think that's fair to say at all. Actually,
well, it doesn't matter if you think it's fair. I'm just saying.
No. That's not a fair thing to say. So in the case of viruses, Jackson, we just put out a wonderful video on this that I was just watching before we came on.
And is he a scientist?
Say it again.
Is he a scientist?
Yeah, he just wrote a book on biology. Yeah.
Is he a biologist?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, we're not close friends. We've only spoken once. But in it, he was explaining that coronavirus and viruses in general, virologists consider viruses to be alive, and many other biologists who don't study viruses do not consider viruses to be alive. Even the cutoff of whether a thing is alive or not is something that we are arguing about. People who really know their shit are arguing about constantly, right? And so similarly, like there's a serious question when we go back in history to study the evolution of humans. Here's a cutoff where it counts as human. Here's a cutoff where it doesn't count as human. Here's a cutoff where it counts as, different sets, different points in our evolution, right? Is it an ape yet? Is it a monkey?
Yeah,
What is
we have to decide where the cutoff is, but there's
right,
still
but they're
something
definitionally arbitrary.
possibly, but we
I
still
don't know why you
cut
say
it off.
possibly, unless you're like a
Because
creationist,
no,
obviously.
okay, well, uh, the thing is, though, there's still something to point to. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is we don't have the thing to point to. We don't have the alien civilization to point to and say that those guys, that's close enough to God. There they are. So without that, all you have is a leap of faith, as you've already admitted to, the least 2 leaps of faith in your thing. I think there's more leaps of faith required to get to your position. And my stance is, I don't care about faith. I just want facts. That's all I want.
Right.
I don't want faith. I don't want beliefs. I want facts. That's all I care about.
It's a fact
Is
that
it acceptable? No. In
No?
your version, it is. Not in mine, though.
So then what's alive?
It's the definition that we gave it. I suppose
Cool.
that's close enough
Cool.
for me.
Cool. Do you want to look that up?
No, because we're not going to get into
No, we wouldn't look that. Why would we look
that? No. Okay. It's not. We're not doing a formalized argument. Trust me, you don't want to do a formalized argument. You don't even have a syllogism, so
I'd love to.
We couldn't. No, you don't. You'd have to have a syllogism. You don't have a syllogism, so there's nothing even to go on. You have an analogy. That's it. And it's not enough for me to do. But at any rate, so we've had some questions for you in chat, and I want to end with those questions and then let you plug whatever you want to plug and call it a day before I whatever. Okay, so before I completely lose my brain and the lobsters takes over. So I'm trying to. I know there was questions, but I just don't know that they were aimed at you per se. Is there an objective answer to a subjective question, or although that's not how he phrased it, and I'm not sure what he was referring to when he typed that.
Yeah. So the way I would answer that is, among humans, there is an objective tall human and an objective short human, right? Because it's comparative to other humans. Similarly, there is an objective tall building comparative to other buildings, right? Similarly, there is an objective definition of what God is, if we're defining as omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, in comparison to human beings.
Okay, and then this was again not a question, but we'll pretend it's a question. Now this is kind of a statement. There's not an omni. There's omni, and then there's not omni. Omni is an absolute. So he's making the point that I was trying to make throughout, which is you have the actual omni, and then you have your close enough. Mm-hmm. And your close enough isn't the actual thing, and therefore isn't the actual thing, because it's not the actual thing. It's just close enough.
So I would argue. Yep. So I would argue that water, in the context of a fish's life, is omni. Right? There's never going to be a point where a fish, I'm assuming that it's living deep in the ocean, is going to leave the water, right? And therefore, in the confines of its system, water is omni. That doesn't mean that water literally is everywhere in the entire universe. It just means that in the confines of that fish's life, it's omni. Similarly, God would be omni in the confines of where we exist, because we're part of it, and therefore we're, of course, going to always be part of it.
Let's see. Just to hey, the skeptic didn't like. I'm not sure which of us said this. It might have been me. It might have been you. Just a collection of atoms shows such disdain to disrespect of physics. Well, I don't think physics is alive, so I can't disrespect.
Yeah, I don't really care if I'm disrespecting.
Yeah, and I also don't really care if I do disrespect. I just care whether or not I'm using the thing properly. And we got into the thing that I love and also hate most, which is natural language being the obstacle that logic in and of itself doesn't really have an answer to. We would need a artificial language to really nail down all of these things. When someone says God, there's a certain, everyone has their own conception of it, and I don't care what the majority says, because that doesn't matter to me. What matters is that every individual human has their own idea of what God is, and that may or may not line up perfectly with the definition, any given definition at all. They might have their own definition. And
if I decide that tall means sandwich,
right.
Tall seems to be a valuable term.
And the only reason I think that this is possible is
I think tall just means tall. I think that if you define tall as meaning sandwich, I think you're an idiot.
I would agree that tall meaning sandwich becomes incoherent. And I would also think that if it's subjective, as you seem to alluded to with this God word, then it's not an objective thing, and then I have no use for it's
comparatively.
Yeah, but I don't even know that there's a thing to compare anyways. So until I have that, I still have to be skeptical. But I don't have an example of it. I know it's a possibility, but that doesn't matter. I need the proof that it is there.
I really want to get into, like, I know you want to leave.
I want to. Yeah, I know we could go on forever.
I really do want to get in. If you'll have me back, I'd love to get into the idea of whether or not.
Well, obviously, would be fair to you that you get to grill me next time, and we can do that on your channel. It doesn't matter to me. But I'm happy to be grilled because I grilled you. It's only fair. But hopefully people have a better understanding of what you mean when you talk about these things. I think I do, but I'm not sure that I do. I still don't, I still am skeptical of God, whatever, of even your version of God, because I don't have any of my criteria for not skeptical.
Wait, there's a really good question from Dave Stewart. Can I
go ahead. I don't know where it is, but go ahead.
It was at 11:21 p.m. Just scroll back up to it. You can find it. But it says, when does all life become God? What if it never becomes technologically advanced enough? This is a wonderful question. So God is always going to be comparative. And so because of that, if you have only extraordinarily low level life, right, and therefore it's not very intelligent, in comparison to it would be God. I do think, however, if we're talking about like a multiverse, that it's fair to distinguish between a God universe and a non-God universe, which is to say a universe that has reached a level of technology by which, like, in comparison to us humans, it would count as being God, and other universes by which it hasn't reached that level yet.
So in comparison to the lobster, I'm God.
No, there's lots of things that the lobster can conceive of that you can't do.
I don't know.
There's nothing that your
lobster can conceive of anything, actually. But I mean, I
wanted to talk about that so bad. Okay.
Can a lobster conceive of things? I don't know. Maybe it conceives of lobster things.
What is
we agree that it's real. Yeah. I'm a god to the lobster. Look, I just want you to say.
No. You're not a god to the lobster. I'm totally I love you. I love you.
So close. No. I want to be beautiful, but you're not a god. Okay. All right. So go ahead. Your channel is in the description, but anything you want to promote, anything that you want to put out there, go ahead.
Okay, so follow me on Twitter. I'm extraordinarily spicy. And follow me on YouTube.
Your Twitter name, just to clarify, is I'm like, look. If I lick you, I will determine whether you're extraordinary spicy or not.
All right.
Sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So yeah, it's the Twitter at Milsrow, and then there's obviously my YouTube, which is Alien Milsrow.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for doing this, and
had a good time.
Yeah, it was interesting, different. Better than the time that I had with the guy that thought God was zero, I think. Although that was
zero?
Oh yeah, that's the whole thing. You should check that out.
Wait, what's his name? Oh, I have to look this video up.
Well, I'll give it to you.
Please do.
Yeah, after I hit the exit button. But at any rate, so you guys go sub to him, check him out, tell me he's wrong, tell me he's right, tell him that I'm the god of lobsters.
I love questions in the comment section. I will answer it.
And
the longer and more complicated the question is, the better.
Yeah, like, ask him what the true nature of reality is, all that stuff. We're going to resolve how everything works after we end the broadcast. I'm sorry you guys are going to miss it, but as always, did we have empirical evidence, repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument? No, but we did have a conversation. So make of it what you will.
I would argue that, but that's okay.
But yeah, you might argue yes, but I say no, and because we didn't do a debate, then we can't answer that question anyway. So I'm gonna hit the button now. Hit the button. This is normally the part where if I was editing the video, this would slowly fade out into the thing, and I was.